Thank you for sharing that, Doctor. We will now begin our Q&A session. We'll be asking questions of the presenter. And if the audience has some questions, we'll open it up to them as well. We first want to explain to everyone how it works. We will not be taking questions directly from the chats. We will be taking them from the participant window in Zoom. So if you don't know how to raise your hand, what you do is you go to the bottom of the Zoom window, second from the left, you'll see a reactions button. And when you click on that, you'll see the raise hand function. Click on that, and then we'll be answering questions in the order in which we receive. When I select you, I will unmute you and prompt you to state your name, where you're from, and ask your question. We ask that everyone keep their questions brief and on topic. We will then mute you. In order to give everyone a chance to get their questions in, we won't be taking follow-up questions. However, if you do wish to ask a follow-up question, you can raise your hand again once you've had your question answered. So we are going to go ahead and begin with an audience question. Yar, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, Dr. Cousens. Thank you very much for your great presentation. I would like to refer. I would like to refer. By the way, I'm from Massachusetts, originally from Israel. I would like to refer to what you recommended about DHA from algae, and I've heard that DHA from algae might be oxidized, then it might cause more damage than benefit. And related to this, there is a new development that was in Israel, having omega-3 from sage, from clary sage.
Yes.
Which make an ALA, not DHA. I would like to know if you're familiar with this and what are your thoughts about this.
Okay, that's a pretty sophisticated question, but the answer is I am familiar. I do ways that when I have questions like this, not your question, my question is, what about the sage-derived, DHA, EPA? It doesn't test as well as the Omega Zen, which is the one I've chosen that has EPA and DHA in it. So the sage one from Israel is good. It's a lot lower dose, but it also doesn't test as well as I've tested on a variety of people. And that's the best I can do with that. I don't know if the science you can make an argument scientifically, but you can make an argument kinesiology-wise. Does that make sense?
Oh, he's muted, but it made sense to me, Doctor.
Okay, good. At least it made sense to somebody. Go ahead.
There you go. Our next question is coming from Stephen. Stephen, please state your name, where you're from, and state your question.
Hi, Dr. Cousens. This is Steve Shore from Syosset, New York. Dr. Cousens, I've been listening to you for many years, and what I'm saying is it doesn't matter how healthy it is, eating a raw food diet is hard to get full on. And I've heard you and Brian repeatedly say the same message, to eat sprouts and eat greens. And I've sat down at lunch and dinner on many days with a giant bowl of sprouts, 16 different sprouts in a mix, lentil sprouts. I eat as much as I can. And even if I add avocado, or, the only way to get full would be literally to eat so much oil and so much avocado. And otherwise, I've tried this so many times, so intensely, and there's nothing that in my experience that says it's realistic to get full on greens. And I don't even know a single person anywhere that does this. Even Brian doesn't do this. So I'm saying the theory is fantastic, but unless you're saying I should stand out by the woods and pick wild edible weeds for 10 hours a day, I don't know how you get full on a raw food diet, which I think is what you're recommending.
That's good. I want to also share in my last interview, just like 2 days ago with Brian, he and I just eat one meal a day. Okay. Why is that? Because our bodies have moved to ability to extract a great much more from the food. Okay. And the truth is, I'm full with my, salad, which is not that big, like a bowl that big. So what's the secret here? I think that it's something that happens over time. Like Brian Clement, like myself, I've been doing this for a while. And you go from 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day to 2 and then to 1. So that's it. I just eat my 1 meal a day is from 12 to 2, closer to 2. And it's something that has gradually happened. Now, that doesn't exactly answer your question, which is a very good question, right? And your intent is also very, very good here. So what I find is that my diet tends to be lower carbohydrate and higher protein, higher fat. Okay, so the fat does make a difference. So avocado plays a role. Now, I know a lot of people in the live food movement, the kind of vegan live food movement, say, well, using extract oils, but a little bit of olive oil on your salad and more nuts and seeds, not just leafy greens. I mentioned macadamia and pecan, for example, are much higher in fat, and they are more filling. So that's a little bit how I do it. I also put sea vegetables in it because they take longer to digest. But the truth is, I get full. Now, was it that way 20 years ago? Not really. So what I'm saying is that your ability to absorb increases. And I don't take enzymes, okay? So I don't even, digestive enzymes. So what I'm saying is it's something that happens gradually. I would definitely use more nuts and seeds in it, particularly, as I mentioned, the macadamia and pecans that are particularly potent, and at least a half an avocado. And maybe you need to eat a whole avocado because you're a little bit more of a fast oxidizer.
Thank you, Doctor. So I
want to question. It's a real important question, and that's kind of the best I can do with that.
Great. I want to ask a quick question here. So you talk about having a high level of cholesterol for brain health. Dr. Esselstyn and many other plant-based doctors talk about having low cholesterol for heart health. How do you thread the needle between the two?
I know. It's very simple. The overwhelming research since 1963, I think, when this came out about cholesterol, has been, and I mentioned, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, is that cholesterol is not a problem. Now, if you're going to go to a cholesterol of 300, well, that's going to be a problem. But if you're a woman, the research shows, a cholesterol of 270, which is really high, at least in a certain paradigm, they live 28% longer. How is that a problem? And the biggest research was in 2009, where, top American journal is saying, hey, it's not related to fat. Heart disease is not directly related to fat or cholesterol per se. And I cite that in my thing. So they can say what they say. I'm just citing the research. And I'm citing hundreds of studies since the original scare happened with cholesterol. And I'm also going one step further. I'm saying this is harmful. We know memory goes down with a high carbohydrate diet, 4 times less memory. And also and people with a higher cholesterol have better memory and better brain function. That's what the research shows. So my answer is, it isn't an argument. The research overwhelmingly, since we got the scare in the 60s about high cholesterol, it doesn't seem to hold.
Thank you, Doctor.
So that's why it's not really an argument. It's overwhelming. When you look at all the research, that's why I had all those footnotes. It's a lot of research out there. It does not support what they say anymore.
Thank you.
Well, initially, we all believed it.
So I'm going to have our next audience member ask a question. Max, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Oh, hi there. Max Tuck here, Hippocrates health educator from Southern England. Hello to everybody. Thank you, Dr. Cousens, very much. I'm particularly interested in your statements with regard to vitamin B12. I appreciate that I have a medical background. I appreciate that the MMA, methylmalonic acid, is the best way to test for vitamin B12 because the blood's not particularly accurate. You mentioned just at the end of your presentation that we need the human active form, but you didn't mention what that was. So I'm well aware about methylcobalamin, but I know that there are a couple of other types of cobalamin. Obviously, we're not talking about cyano because that's the one that's bound to the cyanide molecule, which obviously we would want to avoid. But what about doxocobalamin? And I believe there's another one as well. And on the back of that, is there a supplement that one can take which also contains intrinsic factor, which I believe is a big problem for a lot of people?
Yes. So it's an excellent question, okay? And it's very hard to get the diagnosis of human active B12. The best way to do it, to see if you have it, because I'm not worried about the form, I'm worried about is the MMA test. It will tell you if you have sufficient human active B12. Now, there are certain bacteria that will grow human active B12. And that's there, and it's in certain supplements. And there's one by Premium Research Max B. It's a liquid form. It has alcohol, though a lot of people don't like that. But it also has the intermediary step that you're referring to, because genetically, there's a bunch of people don't have the step to make it. Which is what you just asked. So they add that step, and there's another one called vitamin B code. I saw that on Brian's place too. That has the intermediate steps and has the human active B12 that's made by bacteria that make the human active B12. I don't know exactly the name because I referred to it in a functional way, because everybody gets it all mixed up. You just say, you cited a bunch of names, but when you say human active, that's very specific. And you have to, and these are bacteria that grow in they used to grow in our large intestine. Now they grow in the small intestine. It's not very useful, but those bacteria they have to come from bacteria. They're not synthetic. That's a clue of how to figure it out.
Does that mean, regarding the human active B12, that it has to come from within our own body, or are you also talking about supplementation in order to get the human active?
Well, I am saying that it used to come from our own body, and for some reason, something happened about 200 years ago, and it moved up into the small intestine, which is no good for us. So I'm saying we need a supplementation. Okay. And that has to come from bacteria who normally used to grow in our large intestine. Is that making sense what I'm saying?
So I think so. So are you talking about a probiotic? Instead of just getting B12, you're actually taking the probiotic that'll give you the bacteria in order to form the B12.
Right. Or B12 that's isolated from the bacteria that are growing it in culture. So I mentioned two forms. The Premier Research called Max B, it has that form. And the other one is vitamin B code. I saw that Brian also, I think, advertised that too. It actually has the human active B12 from the bacteria. If it's not from the bacteria, I wouldn't trust it. If it's synthetic, I wouldn't trust it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Doctor. I'm going to get another question from our audience member. Mona, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Hello, I'm Mona from Savannah, Georgia. Thank you for a wonderful presentation today, by the way. You talk a lot throughout this presentation about carbs. Now, I'm one who has been switching over to more green carbs, fruit carbs, and such, and moving away from the quote unquote starchy carbs. I still do legumes and beans for the most part. What is your ideal percentage per day that we need? Because even one meal for me could be very high.
So the truth is, I'm going to answer it two ways. I don't really recommend grains, okay, even the non-gluten grains, because they're too high in carbs, okay? Mm-hmm. So that's part of the answer. Generally speaking, in my Diabetes Successful, There's a Cure for Diabetes book, I talk about 25 to 35% complex carbs from leafy greens and so forth. But for people who do not have diabetes, type 1 or type 2, 25 to 45% leafy green carb type things. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I've already gone over my carb according to you today. Thank you.
But I don't really eat grains. Okay. I mean, it's a rarity.
Mine is just greens. I don't do a lot of grains. I do greens.
Green is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Complex carbohydrate for greens, that's good, but 25 to 45%.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good question. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Our next question is coming from Carol. Carol, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
I'm Carol Darby, and I'm in Bradenton, Florida. Thank you for the presentation. Another young lady asked mostly what I wanted to know. I've been using B12 injections, the I can't say it.
Yeah.
So is that a synthetic that you're saying don't use?
Okay. This is sophisticated. I'm going to make it sophisticated. If you're really deficient, getting an injection 1 time or 2 times may be life-saving. Okay? But in general, that's not the way to get your B12. The way to get your B12, human active B12, is, getting it from the bacteria which make human active B12. And the 2 products I mentioned are what we do. Does that answer your question? But if you're really in trouble and you're really like immobilized and can't think and can't, take a shot, because that's an emergency situation. Long term, it doesn't work out as well. Short term, it may be life-saving.
Thank you, Doctor. I think we've got time for one more question. I'm going to open it up for David. David, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Yes, my name is David. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, and I had 2 quick questions. One is the cacao that you mentioned, Dr. Cousens. Are you concerned about heavy metals? And my second quick question is, I know the Brain On E3 Live supplement has something called phenylethylamine, PEA, and I wanted to get your opinion on if you think that helps the brain, as well as the cacao with the heavy metals potential.
Okay, they both help. I can't rule out the heavy metal issue, but I use different things to pull out the heavy metals on a regular basis, okay? Now, so cacao helps, it improves brain circulation significantly, okay? And I think that's important. And the PEA that's in the Brain On also is very good for brain function. I have been using, even before the present E3 Live, since 1982, when it was first discovered at Klamath Lake. It's the only lake in the world where you can get this stuff. It really does work. I did research, and I know we're almost out of time, but this is research I did, published research, although it's kind of disappeared in some way, but basically I took 3 people with severe Alzheimer's. I mean, severe people unable to dress themselves, okay? Mentally confused, needing to be taken care of by their families. After 6 months on the E3 Live, like this one woman was able to dress herself, be able to exercise. This one man was able to really take care of himself in a much more major way. In other words, E3 Live is phenomenal for regrowing the brain. I'll just put it that way. There's a study in Nicaragua with kids who weren't doing so well in school, and they gave them E3 Live. And again, their performance improved, up in the upper 10%. So it's one of the top things in general for improving brain function. That's the way I would put it. And my research was with really serious Alzheimer's. People got function, they returned to some level of function. Dressing yourself, being able to exercise and feed yourself. So I'm impressed with E3 Live.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Cousens. That concludes our Q&A. Really appreciate all the information that you shared with us, as I'm sure our audience has as well. And to show their appreciation, we're going to open up the mics to hear the cacophony of appreciation from the audience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cousens. It was really great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You taught me a lot.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Cousens.